I covered Genesis chapter 13. So, very brief review. There are two important things in Genesis chapter 13. First is, this is a chapter where Lot and Abram separate. Their possessions are too great. It almost certainly is still a famine, because Abram had intended to stay in Egypt during the whole famine, but got kicked out of Egypt for lying about Sarai. And so almost certainly Abram and Lot are back in Israel. There's a famine. There's not enough grass for each of their livestock, so they split up. And Lot sees the plain of Sodom, that it's well watered, which probably means it still has a lot of grass even during the famine. He moves down there. That's one of the two things that happens. The other important thing is the Lord gives Abram more promises. And the promises that he gives are, look, in all the land that you see, I will give it to you and your descendants forever. And he gives the promise of making Abram's descendants like the dust of the earth. And this is still before Abram has any children at all, that God promises his descendants will be like the dust of the earth. And then he gives Abram one command, to walk through the length and breadth of the land that he is given. So Abram is now at Hebron, which is in the general vicinity of the base of that arrow on the map on the back side. It turns out arrows are very hard to draw in Google Docs. So in the general vicinity of the tail of that arrow is where Abram is. And now we have Genesis chapter 14. Do I have a volunteer who would like to read the first 4 verses? Go ahead, Steve.
And it came to pass in the days of Enderphil, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elazar, and Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, that these made with Ber, king of Sodom, and Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, king of Zebulun, and king of Bela, which is Zor. And these were joined together in the vale of Siddim, which is the salt sea. 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled.
Thank you. So, first thing to realize in Genesis chapter 14 is these first 3 verses are the summary of the first half of the chapter. This is Hebrew literature, and the Bible gives you the summary of what happens first, then tells the details, and then goes back to how that affected Abram. So, we have these 4 kings. Amraphel, king of Shinar. Shinar is right next to Babylon. We're talking about in Iraq. Arioch, king of Ellasar. We don't know exactly where that king is. Assume he's part of with the other 3 kings. Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, that's also Iraq in the mountains. And Tidal, king of nations. The word nations in the Hebrew is goyim, which just means peoples. And almost certainly it means he was a king of a bunch of cities. Not just one city, but a bunch of them. Who are these kings in nationality? They're Akkadian. We're talking about the time of the Akkadian Empire after the Sumerian. And they were the power in that area. And powerful enough that they're influencing events in Israel, which is about between 400 and 600 miles away. So this was the height of the Akkadian Empire. You have these kings of these big cities, and think of these are some of the biggest cities in the whole world. These kings have a lot of power. They're warring with the kings of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim, the 4 cities in this vale of the Dead Sea, and the king of Zoar. Zoar is much more of a little town. We find out about that later when Lot runs there at the destruction of Sodom and these other 3 cities. So we have basically the kings of 4 cities and the king of a little town. We know that Sodom was very rich and powerful. The assumption is Gomorrah was the same. Admah and Zeboim were probably weaker. And all of these kings are going to fight each other in the vale, which means valley, the valley of Siddim. And God is saying for the benefit of Israel, who he'd written Genesis 2, that's the Salt Sea Valley, because it was green and beautiful during this time, and would become an absolute barren desert when God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, which will be in a few chapters. So he's letting his people know that's where this battle happened. Why did this battle happen? You have in verse 4, because these kings, the kings of the Sodom and the 3 cities with them, and the one town, Bela, which would be renamed Zoar when Lot went there, they were serving Chedorlaomer for 12 years. That's an example of how powerful he is. This random king of Iraq is compelling these 4 cities in Israel to serve him. What does that mean? Almost certainly means give him tribute. That they were paying him for the purpose of him not coming and wiping them out. After 12 years of doing this, they either decided, oh, he's not as strong now, or we're stronger, or we just are tired of paying him. So in the 13th year, they don't serve him, they rebel. And realize back then, news travels slowly. So when you stop getting tribute from this random area in your kingdom, first you assume, oh, maybe one of their tributes was taken out by a raiding caravan or something. Next you assume, wait, they're actually trying to go against me. They're not paying me tribute. Then you have to go gather all your armies together and then march the 400 to 600 miles to get over here to deal with it. So they rebel in the 13th year, which, instead of serving the kings of the Akkadians. So in the 14th year, it seems very clearly that Chedorlaomer is the head of all these kings. But think of the Akkadian Empire as being a lot of different cities allied together. Each king was generally king over one city. They were all allied, and they were very powerful together. So what's Chedorlaomer going to do? He's going to bring the kings of 4 other cities and their armies with him because they're part of his empire, because they're allied, and he thinks that will be enough to take out the kings of Sodom, Gomorrah, and their allies. Let's go to verses 5 through 8. A volunteer to read verses 5 through 8. Go ahead, Obi. Thank you. Good job reading. That's definitely the hardest verses of this chapter here. So, the kings over in Israel, they stopped serving the king Chedorlaomer and the kings with him in the 13th year, and it basically takes 1.5 years or just over 1 year, something around that time, for Chedorlaomer to actually get around here to deal with it. Between figuring out what was happening, getting all the armies together, and then marching the hundreds of miles. And since he's taking a trip of several hundred miles, he's not just going to deal with these 5 kings that are rebelling. Notice on the way, he smites all of these people, Rephaims, Zuzims, Emims, and Horites, and then comes back, the Amalekites and the Amorites. It's like, as long as I'm taking 4 armies, hundreds of miles, I'm going to get more people under my control on the way. He goes down what's the east side of the Jordan River. So the kings that are rebelling against him are right where the Dead Sea is on the north side. And so he's going to go down the east side of that and literally take every single city he can find and get all those people, either plunder them or make them all serve him. Then he gets all the way down, going past the Dead Sea. From your perspective, it's like this. Kind of makes a loop here, comes in and wipes out a few kingdoms here, the Amalekites and the Amorites, to get back to what he's dealing with. In other words, we're not just talking about random armies that to take for these 5 cities. He brought his entire force here And he's like, I have enough force here. I can conquer 6 kingdoms on the way and still be fine. So we're talking very strong army. The Akkadians were known for their military strength. He has a huge expedition here. And for the king of Sodom and the 4 kings with him, there's not much choice. You've rebelled against the king of the Akkadians here. You don't have a choice of making peace. You only have the choice to fight once he finally gets here. And so, that's verse 8. Those 5 kings go out with their armies, and they're going to fight him in the Vale of Siddim. 6 countries have already lost, and now you have 5 cities fighting him. The outcome's very predictable. Any questions before we get to verse 9 through 12? Yes?
The Zuzians and Immons, are those terms related to the giants at all?
Good question. My mind immediately tells me no. I didn't look up for that clarification at all. When I think of that, I think we've lost those people names. We know where they are because the Bible gives each of these a place: Ashtaroth, Karnaim, Ham, and Shavah-Kiriathaim. So knowing the places, we know this was east of the Jordan. But all these people I've never heard of or thought of besides this passage here. And then the Horites in Mount Seir, those are special in the sense of the Bible does mention them elsewhere because those are the people God dispossessed to give the children of Esau a possession. The same way as he dispossessed the Canaanites to give Israel possession, he dispossessed these people to give the the people of Esau a possession. Any other questions here? So then, do I have a volunteer to read verses 9 through 12? Go ahead, Gary. So, you have the battle is a very brief battle. All that we have about this is the valley's full of slime pits. What are we talking about? We're talking about tar pits. Nowadays, there are about 2 places in the world that have tar pits that I know of that haven't dried up because it turns out those dry out, exposed to the sunlight, and then they're kind of like asphalt instead of tar. But back here, we're talking after the flood. Things are a lot wetter. This valley was actually green and well-watered. There were tar pits here, which means it's the equivalent of oil quicksand. If you get stuck in it, you are not getting out without help. And so a bunch of the people, when they fled, they got stuck in these pits or fell into these pits. I'm assuming with the land well-watered that we're talking about fields with tall grasses, so it's kind of hard to see these random, maybe 10-foot across tar pits when you're running full speed until you hit one. But it says a bunch of the people fell there. The people that remained fled to the mountains. Why? If you've ever seen pictures of this part of Israel, the mountains are tall, steep, and they have these random caves in them that are like 50, 60 feet up. Armies don't have the time to search every one of those caves to see what happened to all these people. It's if you want to hide in a place where nobody can try to find you, that's the place. David went to very similar caves running from Saul once with the basic idea, you cannot search all of these caves up on these mountainsides to find the people. So everybody else ditches the cities, runs. A lot, for reasons or other, wasn't fighting. Regardless, they get to the city. They take all the goods. We're talking about valuables. The victuals, the word actually pronounced victuals, not victuals. I have no idea why or how, but looking it up in a dictionary, when a pastor in Oklahoma mentioned that, it is true. The word is actually pronounced vittles. That's food. They took all the goods of value, they took all the food, and they took the people, including Lot, and are going away. Almost certainly, as punishment for trying the rebellion, they're taking all the people they could get their hands on to sell them into slavery. Almost certainly, this is why they're taking the people, bring them back, sell them into slavery, get returned on this trip, and tell every other king and city they just conquered, this is what happens when you disobey us. So, they're headed back now. They've gone several hundred miles. They're taking the easy route back. The country they went down to conquer all these cities is kind of rugged, lots of valleys and such. That would have been a slow road to conquer these cities. So they're taking the easy way up, straight up the Jordan Valley. And when you leave the Jordan Valley, straight across this kind of flat land through Syria. It gets higher and higher, but it's mostly flat. And then back around the desert to where they came from. That's where they're headed. So if you look on the map on the other side, they're headed straight up the Jordan River, but they're headed to where that arrow is going to make the turn to head back to Iraq. So, that's what happened in these verses. Any questions? That brings us to verses 13 to 16. Go ahead, Matilda. Thank you. We will stop there for now. Thank you very much. So, we have after this one that escaped, one who was not stuck in the caves and the hills, but was able to run away from this without falling into the tar pits. Basically, if you know the land between where they were with Sodom and Gomorrah and where Abraham is, it's really steeply uphill because they're going from the lowest part of the earth, the Dead Sea Basin, up to kind of a normal altitude, so it's very steep. He gets there, we don't know how long, probably not extremely long, but probably somewhere in the time of one day. He gets to where Abram was living, and he tells Abram what has happened. So, we have now the mention of Mamre, Eshcol, and Aner. They're going to show up again at the very last verse. The very last verse of the chapter tells us that these three also go with Abram. Abram is going to take the lead, and these three will go with him. Now, it's important to note first, now with these 5 cities taken out, the king of Kedorlaomer and the 3 kings with him have now taken out 6 countries, and nobody's tried to stop them or chase them. They're very, very powerful, and we see a complete change in Abram's actions from before, dealing with the Pharaoh of Egypt. He is not considering his own life here. It seems very much he is trusting in the Lord, because otherwise you would see immediately this is an impossible victory. And he takes 318 trained servants. We're talking about shepherds here. They would have had experience fighting wolves and animals and that kind of thing, but probably no experience fighting people and definitely no experience fighting armies. Takes 318, which also shows you how wealthy Abram was. He has 318 servants, basically 318 people working for him. And the implication is, because of culture, most of these were married, and their wives were also working for him. So it's more like Abram has 600 or 700 people working for him. He is a town unto himself. And the journey is not necessarily easy to chase an army, but the army is definitely not moving quickly. They have lots of plunder and such with them. He pursues them unto Dan. Where is that? Dan was the northernmost of the tribes of Israel in terms of where the land was divided. We're talking about 60 miles north. He pursues them 60 miles north. It's a couple days' journey, even going quickly. And we find out in verse 15, so he catches up with them, but he's able to set the terms of the battle. He attacks them by night with his men divided, which would mean he attacked them from multiple sides. In the middle of the night, got them to panic, and pursued them Hobah, left hand of Damascus. How far is that? About another 40 miles. So after defeating them, he chased them 40 miles as they were running, and basically that's enough time. They had to abandon everything. They had to abandon all the people and all the goods they had taken, so Abram recovered all of it, because the people running weren't able to take it with them for the distance of 40 miles. So you have 318 people. Almost certainly Abram was stronger than the three brothers, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. They probably brought a couple hundred other people with them. And that group defeated an army of 4 kings that has currently defeated 6 countries with no problem, and nobody tried to stop them. The Lord was absolutely in this, and as we're going to see, the Bible says this directly later. And not only did he defeat them once in the middle of the night, you're like, okay, that might have been an accident. Maybe they are just really bad at dealing with night battles. He was able to chase them 40 miles, which is going to be a couple days straight chasing them until they had to drop everything and every person they were trying to keep as plunder. So God was very much working in that. Once again, according to the promises God had already given Abram, when Abram was, I'll say, confident in them, God very much showed his power here. Any questions? Yes?
Verse 14, where it says born in his own house, that would imply that they were more than just hired employees, that they were...
They joined themselves unto him, yes, that they joined themselves unto him.
It reminds me of where the 4 lepers were outside the town that had conquered, and then they fled. I'm trying to remember, and the invading army, as they fled, they dropped all their stuff.
That is back at the time of Elisha. It was Jehu, the king of Israel at the time, and the event that pastor is referring is, I'm trying to remember which army it was. The Syrian army. It was the Syrian army. They're outside Jerusalem, and 4 lepers who are starving to death because they've been laying siege to the city and everything around it for a while say, we should at least go to their camp and surrender, because all they can do is kill us, and if they do something else, at least we're going to survive. They go to the camp and they find out there's nobody there, because God, the previous night, to fulfill a promise through Elisha, caused those kings to hear what they thought were 2 full armies marching. They thought, oh, the Hittites and the Egyptians both together are coming to attack us. And so they ran in the middle of the night and left everything. And God fulfilled his promise basically to let the food the next day be sold for outrageously cheap prices through Elisha, and delivered Israel that day.
And it doesn't say that here, obviously, but God, just to remind us what God can do.
Yes. And that brings us to, what does he get in verse 16? All the goods, so everything of value, not necessarily all the food. Obviously, they've probably eaten a lot of it. He gets all the goods. His brother Lot, so all that he had, his goods. The women also, all the women they captured in those cities to take and sell for slavery, probably. They recaptured the women to bring them back. And the people, the other people there that were captured by the army. So Abram gets everything. Do I have a volunteer to read verses 17 and 18? Go ahead, Pastor.
And the king of Sodom went out to meet him after he returned from the slaughter of Chedorlaomer, and of the kings that were with him in the valley of Sheba, which is the king's dale. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God.
So, Abram defeats these kings, and on the way back, the king of Sodom meets him. It's about 15 miles north. He meets him actually very close to where that base of that arrow is in the map on the other side of the page. He goes up from the Dead Sea to that area and meets Abram coming back with all of the people of his cities and all the goods of value taken. And he meets Melchizedek at the same time. Now, Melchizedek, king of Salem, there's a very strong argument in the Bible. This is the king of Jerusalem. It is not conclusive. There is an argument. Regardless, besides the mentions of Jesus Christ, this is the only passage he shows up in the Bible. He meets Abram, and he brings a meal, bread and wine. He is going to eat with Abram, which back then, and still now in certain Eastern cultures, who you eat with is a very big deal. When you eat with somebody, you're saying you're treating them as an equal and as a friend. So Melchizedek, as the king of Salem, by doing this, is saying he's treating Abram at the same position, and that the two of them were going to live and act as friends. So we have those two kings both meeting in the same place, somewhere near where the base of this arrow was. If we're talking about Melchizedek actually being the king of Jerusalem, he's traveled about 20 miles to get here. It's not like this is right next to Jerusalem. That brings us to verses 18 to 20. If there are no questions here, we've already read verse 18. So now, go ahead.
There is one more place that he's mentioned, and that's Psalm 110.
Well, yeah, but that's also in connection to Jesus Christ. So I said besides the connections to Jesus Christ. But I do agree with you. The passage that Pastor referenced is in Psalm 110, thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. And it's spoken of Jesus Christ in prophecy. And that is going to reference what we're just about ready to talk about. Do we have a volunteer to read verses 19 and 20? Go ahead, Yuri. So there are 4 things to talk about in this 2 verses, and these 2 verses are the most important in the chapter theologically. So, first, from the previous verse, we know that Melchizedek was the priest of the Most High God. So, he's actually the priest of God and no other God. He knows the Lord. Let's start. I'm thinking I should have, on my outline, divided this specifically in order. So, Melchizedek's name means king of righteousness. Both from the words and the New Testament mentions this specifically. The word Salem means peace. It's one of the forms of the word shalom, which is still used as a Hebrew greeting, meaning peace. So you have Melchizedek, king of righteousness. Then he's king of the city named Peace. He's the priest of God, and he's eaten with Abram as an equal, and he blesses Abram. The passage in Hebrews talking about this mentions this is proof that Melchizedek is greater than Abram, the fact that Melchizedek blessed Abram. It's also, why is that important? Because the author of Hebrews is using this to say the priesthood of Melchizedek is greater than the priesthood of Levi, which is under Abram. So, this passage, Melchizedek blesses Abram. We don't know what he said there, besides these three words, blessed be Abram. But he gave Abram a blessing, and then he's going to talk about God and bless God. Blessed be Abram of the Most High God. We see that again. He's the priest of the Most High God. He calls God Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. The language in English is kind of unclear, but he's not saying that Abram is the possessor of heaven and earth. He's saying God, the Most High God, is the possessor of heaven and earth. And then, verse 20, and blessed be the Most High God, which hath delivered thy enemies into thy hand. So we have, he calls God Most High again. He directly says that it's God who delivered your enemies into your hand. When we get to the king of Sodom sees something else. But realize there's a contrast here. Melchizedek, as priest of God, knows clearly it was God who delivered these four kings into Abram's hand. There's no human possibility of Abram having defeated them. And then we have, and he gave him tithes of all. The Hebrew is exactly the same way. The meaning's understood by context, and we don't have to guess at who's the he and who's the him, because the New Testament very clearly makes it evident. It was Abram who gave Melchizedek tithes of everything. 10% of all the goods and all the valuables that he had gained at the very least. More likely, it was Abram gave Melchizedek 10% of all of his possessions. More likely, that's what this passage is talking about, because it says tithes of all. It doesn't say tithes of the goods, it says tithes of all. When we get to the king of Sodom discussing, we'll see a difference in the words used. It's very likely Abram actually gave Melchizedek 10% of all of his possessions here after they had eaten together. So, why would he have done that? One is, as the type of God's plan for the future. It's a symbol of what's going to happen. Two is, Melchizedek is actually the priest of God, has a special position of authority here, and Melchizedek has blessed Abram, and Abram is very much evidencing a biblical principle here. In the New Testament it's stated, they which preach the gospel should live from the gospel. But essentially, those in a spiritual authority or responsibility should be provided for physically. And in this case, Abram is also showing his value for Melchizedek. Melchizedek has showed Abram great honor by eating with him as a friend, by eating with him as an equal. And Abram shows Melchizedek great honor by giving him 10% of his possessions. So, that brings us through that part. Why is Melchizedek important biblically? First reason, he is the only person in the Bible besides Jesus Christ who is both a priest and a king. And when you get to the Old Testament prophecies about Jesus Christ, they very clearly say he will be a king from the line of Judah, and they mention also he will be a priest. And the people, the Pharisees, the scribes and such, trying to figure out what the Messiah would be like, were stuck on this. Generally, they would say there were two Messiahs, one anointed as a king to reign and one anointed as a priest to suffer, because they could not see any way how the priests, which have to be of the line of Levi, could also be a king from the line of Judah. There's no connection between the two. Besides the one verse in Psalm 110 already been mentioned, thou art a priest forever, after the order of Melchizedek. That verse is talking about Jesus Christ. After the order of Melchizedek means, one, it's not on the basis of the priestly regulations in the law, and two, it's a priest who is also a king. Jesus is both, he's not a priest in the Levitical law sense. He fulfills the same ministry, but better, perfectly, not just as a symbol, but as perfection. And he's both a priest and a king at the same time. So Melchizedek is used as a symbol in the Bible for that. You have a priest and a king at the same time who is also greater than Abram, just as Jesus Christ is greater than all. And we have the last thing I'd like to mention here. There are, I'll say, offshoots, biblical Orthodox Christianity with unique views that would say that Melchizedek is angelic or he himself was a pre-incarnate version of Christ. That is not true from the passage or the context. The reason people will argue that is there is a passage when it talks about Melchizedek in Hebrews chapter 7. It says he has no father or mother, genealogy, and beginning of days or end of life. Here's what that's talking about. It's not saying we're talking about a being that was not born and that lives eternally. It's saying we're talking about the Jews valued your parents. The Jews valued the people, the family line you came from was a lot in who you were. And he said, Melchizedek, we don't know his father and mother. He has no honor there. We don't know his genealogy. We know the full genealogy of Abraham. We know the full descent of Abraham back to Adam. We don't know anything about Melchizedek's genealogy, who his parents were or such. We don't know anything about the honor that would be due him from that. We don't know anything about when he was born or when he died. By the time of Jesus Christ, the Jews had gone into this. There was a huge tradition that every prophet died on the same day they were born. There was a Jewish tradition regarding the days of your birth. There were certain days were special. There were all these special Jewish traditions on if you were born on a good day. And he's saying, we don't know even anything about when Melchizedek was born, even the year when he died. He's never mentioned besides this one passage in the Old Testament. And all that to reference. Melchizedek is human, a priest and a king. He's the symbol of Jesus Christ, and that he was both a priest and a king. And his honor is not that in what the Jews say was honorable based on obedience to the law and such. His honor was from God in his position that God had given, the same as Jesus Christ. And if you read Hebrews chapter 7, that's exactly what the rest of the chapter argues, is that in all of these ways where God directly honored Jesus Christ, it's not what the Jews are thinking, but it's God directly saying, you are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek, honoring him that way. He says, and let's see what other verses. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. He talks about all these things. God has directly placed Jesus Christ in the position of priest forever in a way that is similar to how Melchizedek is priest. So,
In a nutshell, you could say that what the Hebrew 7 is referring to this passage and say it says nothing about his mom and dad. You could look at it that way.
Yeah.
It's exactly what you said, but it's as it's written, there's no record. He did have a mom and dad.
yes.
Yeah, but it's never recorded, and so, as you said, the Jews made such a high priority of that.
Yeah. And that, just for those listening to the microphone, Pastor mentioned the one sentence condensing of what I said is that Melchizedek was human. He did have a father and mother. All of the things mentioned, they're just not recorded in the Bible. They're not part of how, I'll say, he was viewed before God in the sense of the way the Jews thought. So with that, Melchizedek greatly honors Abram, treats him as a friend. Abram honors Melchizedek in return. And now we see a very different interaction between him and the king of Sodom. Do I have a volunteer to read the last 4 verses? Okay, I will read the last 4 verses. So we have the king, and the king of Sodom said unto Abraham, Abram, give me the persons and take the goods to thyself. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up mine hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take from a thread, even to a shoe latchet, and that I will not take anything that is thine, lest thou shouldest say, I have made Abram rich, save only that which the young men have eaten, and a portion of the men which went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, let them take their portion. The king of Sodom is viewing Abram like a conqueror. The king of Sodom is scared of him. Think about this. The king of Sodom knows that 5 other kings before him have already lost to this army, and the king of Sodom knows how easily his army and the armies of the allies with him were just wiped out. And now we have Abram coming back with his 318 people, and presumably he's barely even scratched from this battle. God has delivered his enemies into his hand. There's no effort. And so the king of Sodom is scared in that sense, like he's just conquered, as the king of Sodom thought, the strongest army in the world. And how long did this take? Probably by the time he left and the time he came back, at most a week or 2 weeks. Back in the time when campaigns were measured in months or even years, the army's gone. He has every part of the goods back. And so the king of Sodom is just like, might makes right. You're the conqueror. Just give me all the people because those are my people and everything else is yours. Take it all. Like, I'm not going to fight you for that. The king of Sodom is very scared of him. He's not treating Abram as an equal. He's treating Abram probably the same way he was treating Kedorlaomer. And we see Abram mention this oath he took to God. When he says, I have lifted up my hand, he's talking about he took an oath to God. He made a promise before God of what he would do. Notice he uses the same words to refer to God as Melchizedek. Time to take a departure to talk about that. Most High God is just saying God is above everything. Why is that important? The false religions at this time associated all gods with geography. This God is the God of this part. This God is the God of the clouds. This God is the God of this. This God is the God of this. The phrase Most High God means God is above, in charge, above in authority of everything. Calling God Most High God is just saying he's God of everything. And just to make it more clear, possessor of heaven and earth. Not only is he God over everything, having authority over everything, he owns it all. So, Abram and Melchizedek both refer to God in that way, and it's exactly the opposite of the false religions, that God both is over everything in authority, he controls everything, and not only that, he owns everything. So what did Abram swear in an oath? He won't take anything. What does anything mean? Not even a thread. The idea of a shoe latchet is a sandal strap. Back then they used leather thongs as the sandal straps, so they'd be really thin, just a few inches long. He said, I won't even take that. I told God I would not take anything. Why did he say that? So that nobody would be able to say that Abram's riches came from X, came from whatever happened. It's like, so that you won't be able to say, oh, the reason Abram's rich now is he took all the riches of my city. That is, Abram is returning all of it, and realize Sodom at the very least was extremely wealthy, and Gomorrah probably was extremely wealthy. This is a lot of riches that he's just returning. And what does he keep? He keeps the food that his men have eaten. They've traveled for days back and forth. So he said, I'm taking the food they've eaten. That's fair. They spent days recovering this. Anybody would say, oh, yeah, all the food, that's the least we could give them. And he says, those three people, the three brothers that went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, I'm letting them take their portion. Like, they didn't come here with this oath. They didn't promise not to take anything before God. They should have their portion of the plunder. They should gain wealth from this. So he once again looks out for those three. This is probably the reason when Abram meets Abimelech later, and when Isaac meets Abimelech even later, both of them treat Abraham and Isaac very kindly, because they're Amorites, just like Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre are. And almost certainly, all the Amorites now know that Abram deals very fairly and justly. Even when he didn't take anything, he gave them riches for their part in this war. And presumably their part in this war was very small. Like God was one who delivered the enemies into their hand. There's probably not very much fighting at all. Any questions here? So that brings us to the end of the chapter. The two greatest lessons to take: the greatness of God, both being Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. What does that mean? You can do things like overthrow the strongest armies in the world, in this part of the world, with Abram and his very small entourage. We see Abram's trust in God and his promises. Abram is not acting with regard to his life, and he's not acting with regard to his wealth. Abram is motivated by his faith in God. We see that very clearly in this passage. With that, let's close in prayer. Dear Lord God, I thank you for today, and I thank you for this opportunity to study your word. We pray that you continue to impress your word, as well as your greatness, your power, and your care for each of us as this day continues, that we might trust you more. In Jesus' name, amen.